Transmite para usted Radio Anáhuac Querétaro, transmitiendo desde el Centro de Medios de la Universidad Anáhuac Querétaro, ubicada en Circuito Universidades número 1, El Marqués Querétaro, una estación de la Escuela de Comunicación y Dirección de Empresas de Entretenimiento de la Universidad Anáhuac Querétaro.
Radio Anáhuac Querétaro, amplía tus sentidos. Welcome to the Arcade, your favorite show in gaming, with your host, David Torres. Sit back and enjoy the show. All your favorite games are here at the Arcade. Let's play. And hello everybody, and welcome to a new episode of the Arcade here on Radio Anáhuac Querétaro. I am your host, David Torres, and we had some issues getting here to the station today, but we are here, we are starting, we're excited to get the show on the road. I teased a little bit last time that I was going to have 3 episodes that are like similar themes right back to back to back. And so today is the second episode of that. Last week we talked about action games. Today we're going to be talking about one subgenre of action games, which is also kind of like the most... I feel like it's kind of one of the most like thought of genres in gaming in general. And again, even though it's a subgenre of action games, it's big enough to have a whole episode dedicated to it. So we're talking about shooter games today. So as per usual, in StartCoin, talking about them more generally, then in, I can't even remember the name of my sections. ADHD is alive and well today. In virtual reality, we're going to be talking a little bit more about, rather than talking about a specific game, I figured that talking about shooter games, it was probably like a very good time to bring up the discussion as to whether or not video games, like produce violence. Moving on to experience points, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite shooter series ever, Splatoon, and then we're going to finish off with news and patch notes. So let's go ahead and get started with Insert Coin. Ready to play? Insert coin. Okay, so, shooter games. What are they? Well, it's kind of self-explanatory. So, shooter games are games where you basically, like, the main focus or the main mechanic is shooting. Usually, like, most commonly firearms, though usually, like, more, like, I was gonna say traditional, but no, I don't know if traditional is necessarily the right word, but like more, old school or antique, maybe, kind of, projectile weapons like crossbows or bows and kind of stuff. Though, yeah, usually when you think of a shooter game nowadays, you would just think of firearms, so like guns, rifles, that kind of like big violent things. And yeah, like basically shooter games have been there since like basically the conception of video games. Like we had some of our first like arcade games with like Space Invaders, where you just had like a lot of targets that you had to shoot at, or else they would get to you, kind of thing. And really, like, this is kind of something that's really like worth noting with shooter games, precisely the fact that like even if it's like a subgenre of something, it also has a lot of subgenres to it to begin with. Obviously there's the shoot 'em ups like the Space Invaders, the more arcade things where it's you against the world. Very alongside that is like Bullet Hell, where it's basically like there's like bullets flying at you the entire time and you have to dodge everything. There's also Run and Gun Shooter, which is more like a 2D platformer where you shoot things that way. Usually the aiming is not necessarily that difficult in my experience in this kind of game, but it's more of a spacing and like being precise kind of thing, as well as doing the platforming, obviously. Then there's stuff like shooting gallery, where it's pretty self-explanatory, kind of like emulating just like a place where you're not really in danger at all, but you're just shooting targets. I'd say probably like the biggest or like the most antique example of this would be Duck Hunt, where you had just shooting at like whatever's flying across the stage or whatever, and you're not in danger, but you're just trying to make as many points as possible. Then the biggest one, which is probably what most people, when talking about modern video games, modern video games in general, but specifically like modern shooter games, the biggest one is like first-person shooters, where you are first person. Like the camera is in first person. You don't necessarily see any character like to represent you, but you do see like whatever you're holding, and you see like a reticle kind of thing. And obviously these are kind of like the biggest, like when you think of big games nowadays, kind of like Call of Duty, for example, like it's kind of that. And some of the older ones would be like, for example, Doom. And this is kind of like what I would say it's probably like more of the like it kind of like it is kind of like I would say probably like the peak or the pinnacle of the genre, I would say, along with the next one. But like, I don't know, with this one it definitely has like more of that dimensional awareness to it. Like first person games to me have always had like that like heightened sense of immersion, but like by extension that heightened sense of like spatial awareness. Like when you think of Minecraft, for example, it's definitely not a shooter. I mean, you have bows, but really that's not even the focus at all. But at the end of the day, like it's a first person mainly game where like the fact that it's first person, it does give you that heightened sense of spatial awareness. So like you have to know where things are, and with something like a shooter where aim is like a big part of it, it definitely gets like brings that to a high and like an even bigger level. There's obviously as well third person shooter, which you do see your character, you do have a reticle, and honestly, like as I'm thinking about it, conceptualizing in my head, it is a little bit weird to explain, even though it is arguably the kind of shooter that I've played the most, because we're gonna get into that a little bit. Well, no, I'd say probably the two shooters that I've played the most are Overwatch and Splatoon, and that's basically Overwatch is first person, Splatoon is third person. So I don't know, but like at the end of the day, it just brings all these like different variations. Now that being said, though, we have kind of run out of time for this segment. We're kind of having a little bit of a shorter one today, more than anything, because I got here late, but oh well. So today we're also gonna have a little bit of a like one video game music fest. I think that's also something that's gonna be common for all three of these related episodes. So today we're doing Splatoon music because it's absolutely insane, it's absolutely fantastic, and I am excited to share it. So we're going to go off into our first song. This is Fly Octo Fly from Splatoon 2, and we will be right back with more here on the arcade. All your favorite games are here at the arcade. Only on Radio Nahua Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos. All your favorite games are here at the arcade. Only on Radio Nahua Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos. And we are here in our second segment, virtual reality. In this show, The Arcade on Radio Nahua Querétaro. I am your host, David Torres. And today we're talking about shooter games. So, this is a good opportunity, I feel like, to virtual reality. We talk about real stuff. We're talking about reality. And so I figured it was a really important thing to bring to this show. Because, in this show, really, what I like doing, or, my objective with this show is, to, fight for, the higher recognition and higher appreciation of video games in general. And obviously, in experience points, I talk about, video games that I love so much and, that have, that artistic kind of element to them. But I think it's also important to talk about, some serious discussions here in virtual reality. And so I figured that's why it was very important to take the opportunity of talking about, an episode about shooters, which are, you can't necessarily, think of the word shooter without necessarily, bringing up really violent images, especially in the day and age that we live in. And and I'm saying the word shooter, independently of video games. However, a lot of the rhetoric that we've seen, really in the last 20 years, but I feel like even, the last 5 years has gotten a little bit more intense with, there's been, presidents of countries in North America saying, basically blaming video games for things that don't really have that much basis. And so that's kind of why I figured it was important to have this discussion here on this episode about do video games actually cause real world violence? Short answer is no. As I was doing research for this, I have come across so much evidence that it's studies after studies after studies that, they really don't find any clear connection between video games and violence. One of the most notable ones, for example, is back in 2011, the U.S. Supreme Court, ruled precisely that video games didn't have any relationship. And to have something like this where, even from just, a legal standpoint, there's an actual, Supreme Court ruling in the U.S. about this, that, I feel like it's just a big enough, pointer. However, I do want to, analyze, why do people, think, or have always had this thing about, video games cause violence? Because, really, I think it just kind of circles back to the level of immersion that only video games can give you compared to other forms of media. Because, if you have a violent movie, yeah, it's definitely, violent content, but people don't necessarily judge that as harshly because, film as an art form, as a media form, it's older than video games. And B, because, the level of immersion is different. In some of, the research that I found, it's people have been cited as saying that, video game teaches people to kill or whatever. And that they dehumanize individuals and, that they are a glorification of violence. However, what I do want to, bring up too, though, it's video games really are not the main culprit here at all. Because if you, things like that, let's just see, these three quotes that I just cited. That, teaches young people to kill, dehumanize individuals, and glorification of violence. I feel like that's just sadly kind of the society that we live in generally nowadays. Like, if you think about how, you know, a lot of like more divisive rhetoric in current day politics, like, you don't need video games for that. Like, video games really don't bring that as much as like real actual people and like people in positions of influence do. And actually there's even been evidence that like completely shows the opposite. Like, when spikes in violent video games popularity are well known to correlate with substantial declines in youth violence, not increases. I'm quoting from this PBS article. And you know, it in a way it also kind of just correlates with something that I bring up a lot in this show about how video games really are kind of an escape for a lot of these emotions. Like, you know, if you're really angry one day, instead of beating up somebody else, you just beat up random characters in Smash Bros, for example. Like, it is kind of that thing of like, you know, it's not that it teaches people to kill, because I feel like in a sad, twisted way, we all kind of have a notion of how that happens, and especially like in countries like the US where, you know, everybody can just like go into a Walmart and get a gun. Like, I really don't think that video games are the problem there. Like, I feel like a lot of the times when people are trying to like really pinpoint video games, it's kind of trying to deter from like actually talking about the real culprits and the real issues that underline these situations. Because really, I mean, and if you think too of like, if you want to categorize all video games into like, oh yeah, all video games are violent, it's like, yeah, tell that to my Stardew Valley farm where where I literally just like grow crops and sleep, or, you know, tell that to my Animal Crossing village where I like just kind of build furniture all day. Like, you know, video games really have come to a point where they're so varied that like for people to just say video games are violent, it really is kind of like a very limiting view of the reality of what this medium is. And, you know, especially when you consider that violent film, violent TV, violent books even are a much more prolific form of media than video games are, or like that they've been existing for a lot longer. It really feels kind of like a scapegoat even to try to pin that on video games. You know, especially because like, you know, video games, again, like they're an outlet, and so instead of necessarily being like sources of violence, it's more of a, you know, a way to like let off that steam. So yeah, I just figured it was an important discussion to bring up to this, because yeah, like video games, I mean, they're chill. Like, even if it's a violent video game, like, it really, at the end of the day, is more of an outlet rather than, like, a master class on how to, like, do any sort of massive crime or whatever. Like, but when you think about, like, the rhetorics and stuff that happens in the real world, like, you know, think about that and come back to tell me, like, what actually causes violence in this world. But anyway, on that note, we have run out of time for that segment, so we're gonna continue on with our next song. This is Fins and Fiddles from Splatoon 2, so let's go ahead and listen to that, and we'll be right back with more here on the arcade. All your favorite games are here at the arcade, only on Radio Nahua Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos. All your favorite games are here at the arcade. Only on Radio Nahua Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos. The games that are more than just a game. Experience points. And we are back with more here on the arcade on Radio Nahua Querétaro. I am your host, David Torres, and today we're talking about shooter games. So moving into experience points, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite video game series ever, but also, like, the main, like, one of the two main contenders for my favorite shooter series ever. Splatoon. Obviously, Overwatch is my other contender for favorite shooter. But I do want to talk about that at another episode whenever I come around to making an episode about the whole Activision Blizzard situation. But yeah, that's an episode in the works because I need to research a lot for that one. But anyway, for the meantime though, Splatoon, what is it? So, you know, again, following with the my trajectory of bringing up really interesting, crazy games for experience points in these action, like in the action era of the arcade, I guess. Splatoon. Okay, like let's go from normal to crazy. Basically, it's a third-person shooter game. That it's mostly played in teams, like the main game modes, it's teams. You basically shoot, like, your weapons shoot ink, and you are basically, well, like, the characters are basically from a race, well, one or two races of characters. Either the Inklings, which are the original ones, or the Octolings. So basically, and these are like based on squid and octopi? Octopuses? I don't know. That's such a weird plural. Anyway, yeah, those guys. Cephalopods. Interesting that that's actually an easier word to say, but hey. So yeah, basically they're based on cephalopods, and well, basically, these characters can transform from their humanoid forms into their cephalopod forms at will. Now, what did I just say? Well, basically, the whole point, like, I think this is best explained by the main gameplay mode of Splatoon. Basically, the main gameplay mode of Splatoon is the Turf War. So basically, it's a 4-player versus 4-player team game where you have an arena and you have a time limit, and basically whoever has covered most of, like, the biggest or the majority of that arena, or whatever team has covered the majority of that arena in their respective team's color of ink, wins. So it's kind of like very, you know, thing of like paintball kind of thing, but like really brought to like its highest expression. And so basically with the whole squid form, what that gives you, well, to explain a little bit, in humanoid form, or kid form as I think it's the official name, that's where you use like your guns or like whatever weapons that you have, and you go into squid form for two things: to refill your ink ammo, or to be able to like sneak around or move really quickly, because you basically swim in the ink of your color. And so it's very interesting. Like, it is basically what you would think of if I were to tell you that Nintendo made a shooter, and it's absolutely fantastic and has all the charm of that. Much like with like one thing that I will say that I recognize too with this game, and it's something that I recognize for Overwatch too, like, it definitely is friendly with new players, because this was actually the very first shooter game that I ever played. And so, like, one thing that I appreciate is having options for, like, newer players to the genre, because obviously it takes a while getting adjusted to, you know, being able to aim. And so, for example, in Splatoon, there's different kinds of weapons. Like, yes, you're gonna have like your ink snipers, your like more like standard kind of weapons, but then you also have like, and this is something that I appreciate, like this game has a lot of sense of humor, and that extends to the weapons as well. You have a paint roller, which is more of like a short range kind of weapon that you just like, you roll around and you're painting the entire arena. Or you can have like a paint bucket that you just keep on like throwing across the stage. There's also like, for example, a paint umbrella, which functions as a shield as well. Like, there's just a lot of really interesting things. So like, well, yes, it does have something for like the more traditional shooter kind of playstyle. It does also have something for more like, different kinds of playstyles that don't necessarily require that same amount of like, precision that comes from being more familiar with the shooting genre in general. And that's honestly something that I appreciate. Like, I feel like that's definitely something that makes it, like, I feel like to me that's the mark of a really great shooter game, that it allows for players from other genres to come in and enjoy it. Which is also something that I appreciate with Overwatch, but I'm gonna need to shut up about that game for a moment. This is Splatoon's moment, okay? So yeah, like basically Splatoon, it's just really high energy, really fun. There's obviously like different kinds of game modes as well. Like, yes, your turf war is kind of like the biggest one that you're gonna, that like if you play this game that you're gonna spend most of your time in. But then there's a story mode, which is really fun as well, and it's like single player, and so there's more challenges to that point. But then there's also like the ranked game mode battles where, for example, there's tower control. So basically, you have a map, 2 teams as well. And so basically whoever is controlling, gets on a tower, that tower will move towards their target. And so whoever gets it to the other side first wins. And so like there's that kind of stuff where it's, it gives a lot more variety. There's also Salmon Run, which is actually a really cool, like, it's really cool, and it's, like, it was introduced in Splatoon 2, and it's gonna be expanded further in the next game, but it's kind of more of like a, player versus enemy kind of thing. So, in a team, you basically are trying to protect an island from, like, the invasion of the salmon. And yeah, that's honestly something that I also kind of really appreciate. Like, the entirety of Splatoon is very like marine themed, which, as much as I don't like fish or the ocean or any of that kind of stuff, like, it is a cool aesthetic, I will say. And so like, it has very good puns. Like, Nintendo will always bring that sense of humor to stuff, and Splatoon is definitely like a big one when it comes to that. Like, having the puns, having the like interesting, visuals and aesthetic. Obviously, to stuff like the music, as we have been listening to throughout this episode, like very high energy, very exciting, because obviously you need something high energy to go along with the gameplay that it has. And yeah, so basically that's that for Splatoon. As of right now, there's 2 games out. Splatoon the first on Wii U, which I don't know if you can necessarily get it anymore. Well, I mean, I'm sure you can probably find it, but I'd say it's probably a lot harder getting a Wii U nowadays too. But there's also Splatoon 2 on the Switch, which is a lot easier to get. And there's also Splatoon 3, which was announced earlier this year. Was it announced this year or last year? I don't know. It was announced that it's coming out later this year. And yeah, so also coming out for the Switch. So, if you're looking to get Splatoon 2, you might just want to wait for Splatoon 3, but, I don't blame you if you want to get both of them. They're they're all fantastic games. And yeah, so on that note, we're going to go off to our third and last song of today. This is actually a song that, like, this is probably going to be, like, the most iconic Splatoon song. There's basically, like, a rendition of this song in every game that's come out. And It also just so happens to be a song that I use for my intro and outro for this show. So if it sounds familiar, well, it is. So we're going to go off and listen to this song that is Splatak from the original Splatoon. And we'll be right back with more here on the arcade. All your favorite games are here at the arcade. Only on Radio Nahua Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos. All your favorite games are here at the arcade. Only on Radio Nahua Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos. A new update just dropped. Patch notes. And we have reached our third segment here on the arcade on Radio Nahua Querétaro. I am your host, David Torres, and this is patch notes. So, news for this week. Interestingly enough, there's actually not that very many big video game news this week, but let's just say that there's a massive bit of tech world news this week that I figured, you know what, tech, video games, it's not that much of a stretch. I think it's an important thing enough to bring up and discuss, but first and foremost, we do actually have two pieces of video game news. The first one's actually kind of very, well, not kind of, it's very related to what we have been talking about today. And it's that Splatoon 3 finally has a release date. They came up with another trailer. It was basically like showcasing one of these turf wars and how it comes up in this game. And they also showcase a couple of like really interesting features. Like one thing that I was like super excited to try out. I don't know if it's like a specific weapon or if it's just an ability that's getting incorporated, but it kind of looked like a grappling hook, which honestly, everything that has to do with like, you know, different ways of movement in the game always excites me. So I'm looking forward to that. What I'm not tremendously happy about, though, is the fact that Splatoon 3 will be released on September 9th. They had said that it was coming out in the summer, and while, yes, technically September is summer time, no. So that does sadden me a bit. I was expecting to be able to play it in like June or July. But oh well, it is what it is. Nah. So hey, it looks exciting and I'm looking forward to it. So I guess that's what matters at the end of the day. At least now we know exactly when it's coming out. So yeah. Other video game news, basically, the Super Mario Bros. Movie that had been announced with starring the Crisp Rat has got delayed to 2023. Honestly, just out of who the guy is, like out of who the protagonist is, I'm not necessarily that excited for that movie. But I mean, you know, it's all right. As Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, says, a delayed movie is eventually good, but rushed movie is always bad. So yeah, very, very good quote from him. But I mean, either way, I'll probably end up watching it just because, you know, Mario. But yeah, I don't like the Chris Pratt. Anyway, moving on to talking about other people that I don't like. In what's probably one of like the biggest news that has come out this year, Elon Musk has bought Twitter for $44 billion, and now Twitter is a private company completely owned by the elongated muskrat. I am concerned. Like, I'll just put it out that way. I mean, just in general, I am very opposed to the idea of billionaires, period. Like, you know, when there's so much poverty, like, having so much wealth concentrated on, like, individuals, that's just not, like, no. Like, there is no way that I'll ever support that. Obviously, there's supporters of him that, like, you know, are thrilled for this, saying that it's going to be, like, more of a, like, truly fighting for freedom of speech. Honestly, though, I feel like it's just, like, it's just going to give more platforms to the wrong people. Like, I don't know. Like, I am not thrilled about it. And what also kind of, like, you know, shocked me yesterday when I was on Twitter, and I mean, obviously, like, the deal is just sealed, so he's not assumed the power of Twitter yet, at least not to my knowledge. But like, yesterday I had a thing, like, I went in, and I got a thing of, you can use this an NFT as a profile picture now, and I'm like, not this. Like, anything but this, please. So yeah, that's kind of the world that we're living in now, and I am concerned. I am open to being pleasantly surprised, but I am not excited about having billionaires own literal, like, platforms where people, like, you know, connect and have conversations, especially one so as explosive as Twitter is. I am concerned. There's no better way that I'm gonna put it. I am concerned for the future of that platform, but, well, fingers crossed. I hope that things turn out for the best, I guess. You know, God's plan, whatever the kids are saying nowadays. Just cross your fingers and hope for the best, I guess. Anyway, though, on that kind of grim note, we have reached the end of the episode for today. I hope you guys had as much fun as I did today talking about shooters and listening to good Splatoon music. And I hope that you're, getting your tinfoil hats ready or whatever. Thank you so much to Ale over here for producing us, as always. Thank you so much to everyone for watching. I hope that you have a fantastic rest of your week, and I will see you all in the next one. We might have run out of lives for today, but in the arcade, the game is never over. For everything about gaming and what we love about it, join your host, David Torres, every Wednesday at 1:15 p.m. here on The Arcade, where we have all of your favorite games. Only on Radio Nahua Querétaro. Amplía tus sentidos.